Hello guys and welcome to the course of Psycholinguistics. So this is the first lesson that we're going to take, the first video lesson, and I would like to start with a short poem um, by Tashibana Akemi. This is a Japanese poet, and this poem was written in the 19th century. It is called Happiness is When. Happiness is when you find some rice in the rice bin you thought was empty. And now you're alright for another month. Happiness is when you're reading along aimlessly in a book and come on someone exactly like yourself. Happiness is when you're sick of reading a book and just then someone with a familiar voice knocks at your gate. Happiness is when you got some passage that's supposed to be so difficult and all by yourself you figure out the meaning. Happiness is when sunset finds you in some country temple or mountain village and they say, stay the night, and you do. So, the joy of the little things, right? Well, my friends, so we're going to start with the course, as I mentioned before. It's really important that you follow the presentation because I will be mentioning some of the slides. So please download the presentation if you haven't, and go to the slide number 2. So it seems pretty obvious that the course of psycholinguistics has to do with two different disciplines or science, if we can call them that way, at least one of those, or fields, right? It's definitely a combination between psychology and linguistics, right? So let's take first the number one term, right? The term that let's say it starts the word, or the first part of it, that is psychology. So what is your concept of psychology? Before reading anything else, before advancing in the video, so let's do something that I have done also with other courses, and I know that some of you are in some of my other subjects. So let's have a Dora the Explorer moment in which I am going to ask you a question, and you over there in your monitors, cell phones, tablets, whatever you are, and hopefully are going to answer, right? So what is your concept of psychology, right? We're going to do this very often. So Carlos, sure. Okay, yes, I know that you are not sure, but what is your concept of psychology? Okay, maybe that's it. So let's talk about the etymology of the word, right? Let's say that psyche comes from a Greek word, right? That means actually breath of life, right? So I don't know if you have seen at some point something like this in the uniforms of psychologists or people associated with mental health. This symbol that is present sometimes in their shields, in their emblems, or in some other places. It just looks like a little bit like a trident. Well, I don't know if you have. Take a look at them if you haven't, because it's really present all around. And this is actually the initial letter of this Greek word. Of course, you are seeing this in reverse, so it will be the first on this sense. Okay, it looks a little bit like this trident, and a V and an X and an N, and this word means psych or psyche in Greek. And as I mentioned before, this meant breath of life, right? Like the breath that the gods insufflated into people in order to make them live. So by comparison, we can say that psyche back then meant soul, right? Which is really a religious concept, right? Actually, that was exactly the name of Psyche, the goddess of the soul, right? let's say that there's an interesting Greek story behind that. Psyche was this girl that was a mortal, a human, very very beautiful princess, and she started like attracting the gazes of all people, of all men, and gods, being as they are, uh, became jealous. So Aphrodite, that was the goddess of beauty and passion and some other things, started being jealous of the girl, and she sent uh, Eros, and the idea was that he sort of made this Psyche fell in love with a really ugly man, yes, with a really hideous man, as a punishment for being so beautiful, because gods were like that. So Eros went to try to that Eros is the Greek version of Cupid, no, this little angel with arrows that made people fall in love. So that was Eros back then, and he had this mission of making this girl in love with somebody else. But when he saw her, well, she was so beautiful that he fell in love with her, and they became a couple, right? So let's say that is why they say that the soul, Psyche, and love, Eros, always go together, right? In order to have a complete love, you must have like somehow a coordination of mind and heart, right? Psyche and Eros. Mm, so that's Psyche, it's the soul. But of course, like thinking about a serious discipline, science, or whatever you want to call it, we'll discuss that further on later on. Um, let's say that discussing that you are going to study the soul, yes, because you know that logos, yes, the logo part is a study of, or the academic research of, like biology or um, any of the other logos, right? Um well, it was not very scientific, right? So eventually, this study of the soul became the study of the mind, right? That was initially what psychology was when it was somehow started, right? Uh, Nevertheless, guys, mind is something really difficult to measure, right? It's something intangible. What is your mind, right? Like, is it in your head? Is it in your brain? Is it in your heart? It is in your neurons. Let's say it's difficult to locate this zone somehow because it's intangible, right? So eventually, well, there are different schools, different theorists, there are different positions towards the definition of psychology, but for this particular course, what we're going to understand as psychology is the study of the behavior of people, right? Of course, this is not really as accurate as we would like, because if we're talking about the mind, sometimes you think certain things and you act in a different way, right? Or you think certain things and say some other ones. But well, that is as close as we're going to get in terms of a definition of psychology for now. Okay, so that's psychology, study of the behavior of people. Now, what about linguistics? Right, you're professional in that. You're already you already have taken, as far as I remember, two uh, two different linguistics courses, general and applied, I think. And I'm not sure if you have. Oh, probably next semester you will be taking social linguistics. So you're already pretty much experts on those, right? So Dora, moment, what is linguistics? What is that? Give me a definition. So, right, Larissa, very well. That's it. So linguistics is the studies or the scientific study of language, right? That we're minimizing it pretty much, but that is the generality of it all, right? So if we know what is psychology and what is linguistics, so we can sort of put together a definition or a combination of psycholinguistics, right? So if you can go please to the slide number 3, you will see that there's a definition of this, right? And it says psycholinguistics studies the psychological and neurobiological factors that enables human to acquire, use, comprehend, and produce language. Okay, so let's take apart this definition a little bit. Studies the psychological and neurobiological factors that enable humans to acquire blah 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 language, right? So basically we are going to be studying this subject theoretically and hopefully practically, because even though we are taking virtual classes, there are many things that we can do at a practical level. So all these behavioral, mental, let's say, conditions that somehow contribute or are an obstacle or are a component of the language, right? So all these psychological factors, also the neurobiological factors. So the psychological had to do mostly with the mind, right? And the neurobiological has to do with everything that it's a little bit more tangible about psychology, right? So the organs associated to that and the cells, right? Such as the brain, such as the different lobes of the brain, the zones of the brain, the functioning of the neurons, and all these different things, right? Of course, we're going to do this at a level of a BA program. We're going to analyze certain things related to the things that are closer to our interest, but that's basically it, right? So studies the mental and the ones that are a little bit more tangible about the organs, right? That enables humans to acquire, right? So how do we learn, if you want to use that word a little bit freely, to acquire the language, but also we are going to be interested in the use of the language, right? How after I, if you want to call it that way, absorb certain knowledge and principles and usage of the language, I am going to apply it, right? So how I'm going to utter some words, how I'm going to write them. Comprehend, yes, so this has to do with receptive skills, so how I'm going to be able to process this noise that comes from outside and turn it into words, into something that I understand, right? And how I'm going to produce it, yes? How I'm going to speak, how I'm going to write, how I'm going to create or assign meanings, or propose new words, or propose new meanings to words, or create a slang, well, all these different things, right? So hopefully this combination between psychology and linguistics, that is psycholinguistics, must be clear enough as a definition over here. Very well. So let's go into the next slide, the number 4, and we are going to see some subdivisions over here. Of course, I think it's clear that although you already had some previous subjects about psychology, such as I think that you took psychology of teenagers and children. I think that should be like second semester or 4, as far as I remember. Well, there is a strong component of linguistics over here, right? So you will see that many of the subjects that you are already aware of, many of the topics and many of the ideas that you're already aware of, should be included over here, right? So let's take a look, a little bit of a little of a refreshment to this concept, right? So, for example, what is phonetics, guys? Yes, what is that? You took, I think, at least 2 subjects about that, phonetics and phonology and pronunciation, so you must be a little bit aware of that. So, what is it? Right, Jose? That is correct. So, phonetics, what is it? It's the production and perception of the speech, right? Basically, these sounds that we can analyze in any language, and that it basically deals with a phone, right? That is like the most important. Now, the phonology has to do specifically with the interpretation of speech in a particular language, right? And basically it deals with the phoneme, that it's like the smallest unit, or the smallest amount of sound that we can interpret, right? Now, what about the other one? What about morphology and syntax, right? Like, what does it have to do with it? What is the difference? Anybody can tell me about that? Deal with that. Remember that these are concepts that you don't need to memorize, but at least you need to have a general idea of it. No, so remember that morphology has to do with understanding how the words are formed. Yes, how words can be put together and be interpreted as such, and the syntax is mostly, let's say, yes, Paula, very well. It has to do with the order, no, the organization of words. How, if I put them in a particular order in certain organizations, they may mean a thing or another, right? And finally, semantics and pragmatics, right? That is actually another subject that you took. It has to do with meaning, of course, and then with the use of the language of such meaning into a context, right? So take all this into account, because basically we're going to cover all of this into the context of psychology and into the context of language acquisition and some other contexts, right? Hopefully all these tools that you learn in other subjects will be employed in this one, and of course in some other ones, and most importantly in your professional life. And that will be something that, let's say, it's really important in this particular subject. The fact that you're required to learn or to know or to make use of something that you learned in the past in order to advance in this particular subject. So if you have your notes about those subjects, excellent. You can reread them maybe if you have the time, or at least try to refresh a little bit this knowledge. Okay, so we are going to study in this subject three particular branches of psycholinguistics. We're going to focus specifically in these three. And those are language processing, that will be a first branch, language acquisition, and then neurolinguistics, right? So those are like the three that we are going to be most interested in. And let's take a look at each one, just in a general way, and then we go one by one, and we will ask some additional questions. So basically, language processing refers to what happens into our mind when we speak or when we listen, right? What are the central processes and mechanisms underlying these activities, right? It has to do with what happened into our mind, yes, by the moment we try to utter some sort of sound, or we want to produce something that goes out, yes. So you must be familiar with the productive skills, and then also with the receptive. So what happens when we listen? How is it that all this coded information at some point becomes meaning, and which is fantastic, right? Because it happens usually in a fraction of a second, right? There's all this information that is coming to our minds, to our brains, and they most of the times are processed successfully. There are some mechanisms, some process, some internal logics over there that we're going to study. Then we're going to talk about language acquisition, and this language acquisition, specifically the one that we're going to deal with, is specialized on children, right? So how do young children learn to speak? Yes. How is it possible that they acquire a mother tongue, a native language, or others, a second one or a simultaneous one or something like that. So this branch of language acquisition deals specifically with that, with the process of acquiring the language since our young age. And finally, the third branch that we are going to analyze is that of neurolinguistics, right? As I mentioned before, this has to do mostly with the organ, yes, with our central nervous system that we will see in some of the other slides, and how is language represented in the human brain, yes, and with this tangible organ that we all have and that has different regions that are supposed to have different functions and all that. Okay, so those are the three general let's say branches that we are going to study. And here, starting in the slide number 6, we are going to see some of the sub branches and the first assignment that we're going to have for the subject this week. Okay, so first of all, I am going to mention the branch, then the sub-branch, and then there is a question over there. Okay? So, what I want you to do is that according to your experience, to your previous knowledge, if you have read about it, to your, when I said experience, I meant your own experience as a kid, as a teen, as a growing person. So you can answer this question based on that. Also, you may have some intuitions based on your, let's say, work as teachers, right? Like you've been in contact with other people, children or teens or whatever. Some of you already work in language centers. So use all those resources in order to answer the questions. Please, I don't want you to go online and look for an answer to this. I just want you that from your experience and from your intuition, you answer the questions that are there. It doesn't matter if they are wrong. It's okay. I just want to see what is your previous knowledge about it, and just for you to be, to feel safe. Most of these questions that I'm going to ask have not been able to be answered by a specialist in neurolinguistics, in psycholinguistics, a neurologist. Any of those specialists have been able to completely answer some of those questions. So don't worry about it if you feel like you don't have a full idea of the possible answer to this. But just try to do it with your own resources. You don't need to answer in a very long way, so 2 or 3 sentences might be okay. Just try to make sense and do it as completely as you can. So let's start with the first branch that I already mentioned. That was the language processing one. So here we have a couple of sub branches, right? The first one is speech production. Yes, what do you do when you speak? And the question is this: what is going on from thought to output, the actual production of a sound wave? So how do you imagine, yes, that a thought, something that it's in your brain, this imprecise place that is the mind, how do you think that it becomes speech? Yes, that is the question. Yeah, like what are the processes that intervenes over there? If you have some previous knowledge about this, great. So probably you can answer in a more scientific way. Otherwise, just guess. What's the worst that can happen, right? Then we have the comprehension part. Yes, and it's the questions are this: how do we interpret the input, and how do we identify linguistic units within it? How do we interpret this in a conceptual way? How do we understand what is being said to us? So there are 3 questions over here, but you can provide only one answer, right? And it's basically how can we understand? Yes, so if you can see, the first question is about production, about speaking, and the second one is about listening and understanding. Yes, how do I know? And then I come again with the same example of formas discursivas when you were with me, most of you, in a previous course. So how my brain understands that the fly that they're telling me about, it's the animal or it's the verb, or it's the person who is always going to a bar and it's a bar fly. Yes, how that process of understanding like takes place. Okay, so please, that's it. Remember, it doesn't need to be a very long answer with a couple of sentences. It will be enough. Then we have the other sub branch, that is the other branch. Sorry, that is the language acquisition one, and here we have three sub branches. Okay, the acquisition studies. That it's how can we study young children if they cannot answer our questions at a very early age. Of course, like this is something that happens, for example, to pediatricians. If you go to the doctor, you can say, "Hey, doctor, it hurts over here. I feel it that way. I have a fever. I when I laugh, it hurts." Well, you can say that, but what about children, right? Like most of them, at a certain age, are unable to completely communicate. At least to be very specific. So, how do you think that they can be studied? Okay, it's an interesting question. Then strategies. That is another sub branch. What are the central strategies children apply when learning their mother tongue? So it's very simple to ask somebody what is the strategy that they use in order to learn a language. For example, okay, I go to internet and do some exercises, or I practice with songs, or I don't know, have international friends, so I chat with them or call them, etc. Right? But so how children do that? And when I say children, I mean from babies to kids of 18 months, 12 months, something like that. And then we have the phases, right? So like the stages. So what comes first? What happens next? How long are these phases? So again, probably the question is pretty ample, pretty wide, but you just need to answer in a short way. So what do you think that happens first? Like children first understand and listen, and then they repeat. Uh, when is like the time in which they are supposed to speak or to utter a word, or to say da or ma or whatever, right? So do not extend too much. I understand that specifically this word, this question, may be too ample, but just keep it short. Keep it two sentences, three sentences, and that will be more than enough. And finally, you have the neurolinguistics part, and there are like a couple of things over here. And it's first of all the CNS, that is a sub branch, and as I mentioned before, this is the central neural system. Um, and the function of language in the human brain. It is not presented as a question over there, but let's say that we can ask it in a way of what is the function of the language in the human brain. Like does it accomplishes a particular function of or goal, or is it there for just like automatic? Well, something like that. This is a really interesting question. Sorry, the second one, the second sub branch, that is brain centers, because normally we have certain perceptions. So we have read about creativity and mathematics and logic and I don't know, lateral thinking, and this has to do with the left and the right brain side, right? So I'm really interested about this one, and see what is your perception and your previous knowledge about it. So what are the central functions of the hemispheres? You know that we have a left and a right, and are they both equally employed in the processing of natural language, right? So we speak only with one side of the brain and listen with the other one, or how is it, right? So take a look at it and try to give us an answer. And then language disorders, something that is really important, right? So what are the effects of brain damage in language? So if you have a lesson because you had an accident, you sort of hit your head, or you had some other kind of difficulty, right? So does this have anything to do with the way we speak, listen, or understand? That's it, okay? So please, there are about 9 questions, I think, a little more, a little less. It may look a little bit long to answer, but remember that I'm just asking you to give me your general ideas. Um, I'm not going to grade this based on how close is to the truth. This is just an exercise of assessment, okay? And also something that you can do. So, thank you very much and see you on the next video, okay? Hugs.